Imagine this. It's a bright spring morning in South Korea. Children are laughing, running through the streets, excited to spend the day together. 5 young boys, barely teenagers, are heading out for what should be nothing more than a small adventure, collecting salamander eggs on a nearby mountain. But by the time the sun sets, these boys will never return. What happened on that mountain sparked one of the most infamous mysteries in South Korea's history. A tragedy so haunting that even today, more than 3 decades later, it continues to raise questions without answers. This is the story of the Frog Boys. Our story begins in Daegu, the 3rd largest city in South Korea at the time. It was March 26, 1991, a day marked by political activity. Across the nation, adults were preoccupied with voting in parliamentary elections. But for 5 young boys, ages 9 to 13, politics meant nothing. They had something far more exciting planned. Their names were Kim Jong-sik, 9 years old, the youngest of the group, bright-eyed and full of curiosity. Park Chan-in, 10 years old, playful and adventurous. Kim Young-gyu, 11 years old, always ready with a smile. Jo Ho-yun, 12 years old, calm, thoughtful, and dependable. Woo Chol-won, 13 years old, the oldest and natural leader of the group. That morning, at around 8:20 a.m., the boys gathered near their homes. They were excited. Their plan? To head up Waryeong Mountain, just a short walk from their village, to collect fire-bellied salamander eggs, creatures they called fire frogs. There was supposed to be a 6th boy, Kim Tae-yong, but his father, worried about the election and wanting him to stay home, forbade him from going. As it turned out, that decision saved Tae-yong's life. By 9 a.m., witnesses spotted the group of 5 walking toward the mountain. They carried small sticks, a box, and the kind of innocent energy only children possess. At 11:30 a.m., a student hiking near a cemetery on the mountain reported hearing 2 loud, terrified screams. At the time, he thought little of it, but later that memory would haunt him. As lunchtime approached, the boys' parents expected them home, but the hours passed. Noon became afternoon, then afternoon turned into evening. Still, none of the 5 had returned. At first, parents tried to calm themselves. Maybe the children had gone deeper into the mountain. Maybe they lost track of time. But by 6:30 p.m., worry turned into panic. The families grabbed flashlights, lanterns, and ropes. They called out the boys' names, scoured familiar trails, searched streams and hidden paths. The mountain was practically in their backyard. Their children knew it well. Surely they would be found. But they weren't. At 7:50 p.m., parents went to the local police station to file missing person reports. Unfortunately, that very night, most officers were occupied with the election. The missing children weren't seen as an emergency. Police told the parents to wait. So, once again, the families had to take matters into their own hands. They searched through the night, combing the mountain until 3 a.m., but turned up nothing. By the next morning, the story could no longer be ignored. Authorities finally mobilized. More than 300 police officers, supported by military soldiers and helicopters, joined the search. They combed through the slopes of Waryeong Mountain, checked nearby rivers, explored abandoned houses. Theories began circulating. Could the boys have run away from home together? Did they simply get lost? Were they kidnapped? Or whispered in hushed tones. Were they abducted by North Korean agents? Remember, this was the early 1990s. The Korean peninsula was tense. The possibility of abduction by the North wasn't entirely out of the question. But no trace of the boys was found. The media descended on the case. Newspapers began calling them the Frog Boys. It wasn't accurate. The boys had set out to find salamander eggs, not frogs, but the nickname stuck. The families refused to give up. They printed 50,000 flyers with the children's photos. They rented a truck and drove across South Korea using loudspeakers to beg for information. Soon the case became national news. The story of the 5 missing boys touched every parent in the country. Even the president himself, Roh Tae-woo, issued a directive ordering police and the military to devote resources to the investigation. Within the first year, police received nearly 1,000 phone calls. Some were hopeful. Some were cruel hoaxes. One caller demanded a ransom of 4 million won, but then vanished. Another insisted the boys were buried under a house. One woman even claimed she heard children's voices in the background of a call, crying for help. Every lead ended in disappointment. Over the years, as many as 320,000 people, police officers, soldiers, volunteers, and civilians took part in the search. Yet the mountain kept its secret. With time, the theories grew stranger. Some locals whispered that the boys had been kidnapped by outcasts, lepers hiding on the mountain. Others insisted aliens were responsible. Television shows dramatized the case. Documentaries speculated endlessly. Filmmakers produced movies inspired by the mystery. For the families, it was torture. While the nation treated the story as entertainment, they were left chasing every rumor, every false hope. Many parents quit their jobs. They traveled city to city, living in trucks, hunting for their children. Year after year, the trail grew colder. In January 1996, the tragedy took an even crueler turn. A respected scientist, Professor Kim Kwan of the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, publicly accused one of the fathers, Kim Jong-sik's father, of murdering the boys. According to the professor, the father had killed them and buried their bodies beneath his own home. Police acted on the claim. They raided the grieving man's property and began digging. Imagine that. Years of searching, then suddenly being accused of murdering your own son. Nothing was found. The accusation was false. Professor Kim was dismissed from his position and later prosecuted, but the damage was permanent. The father, humiliated and broken, sank into alcoholism. By 2001, he died of liver cancer. His name never cleared in life. For over a decade, the mountain remained silent. Then, on September 26, 2002, everything changed. A man collecting acorns and chestnuts stumbled upon what looked like human bones. Police returned to the site and uncovered the unthinkable. 5 sets of remains. After 11 years, the Frog Boys had been found. The location was shocking. The bodies were discovered just 3 kilometers from their homes and only 500 meters from the nearest village. The area had been searched countless times before. How had they been missed? The remains told a horrifying story. 3 skulls had large holes and fractures. The boys' clothes were stripped off and twisted into makeshift ropes. Their bodies lay close together, buried shallowly, with heavy rocks placed on top. Nearby, bullet casings were found, though later deemed unrelated. This was no accident. It was murder. Forensic analysis revealed chilling truths. 2 boys, Park Chan-yin and Jo Ho-yun, showed no signs of head trauma. Experts believed they had been strangled with the improvised cloth ropes. 3 boys, Woo Chol-won, Kim Jong-sik, and Kim Yong-gyu, suffered fatal blunt force trauma to the skull. Woo Chol-won alone endured 25 separate head injuries, evidence of fierce resistance. Kim Jong-sik's arm was fractured, consistent with trying to block a blow. Investigators suggested the murder weapon was a metalworking tool, sharp on one side and blunt on the other, matching the skull fractures perfectly. Piecing it together, the likely sequence was grim. The boys encountered an unknown adult, perhaps a worker in the area. Woo Chol-won resisted and was beaten savagely. Kim Jong-sik tried to fight back, but was overpowered. The other children were tied with strips of their own clothing, then strangled. The killer buried the bodies hastily, weighing them down with rocks. Shockingly, police initially claimed the boys had died from hypothermia after losing their way on the mountain. The families were outraged. How could 5 children, familiar with the area, simply get lost just a short distance from their homes? And what about the fractured skulls, the ropes, the shallow graves? The public agreed. It was murder, and everyone knew it. To make matters worse, the excavation was handled carelessly. Officers dug with shovels, scooped bones into plastic bags, and destroyed valuable forensic evidence in the process. The families had waited 11 years for answers, only to be met with incompetence and insult. By the early 2000s, the Frog Boys case was grouped with South Korea's most infamous mysteries, alongside the Hwasong serial murders. But unlike other cases, this one has never been solved. In 2006, the statute of limitations expired. Even if the killer were identified, they could no longer be prosecuted under South Korean law at the time. For the parents, it was unbearable. They had fought for years, only to learn the truth too late. Some died before ever knowing what really happened. Others still live with the pain, visiting the boys' graves, demanding justice that will never come. The story of the Frog Boys is more than a crime. It is a reflection of systemic failure, human cruelty, and the devastating power of unanswered questions. 5 children left their homes one spring morning in 1991, chasing the simple joy of catching salamander eggs. They never came back. Their discovery, more than a decade later, brought answers, but not closure. And so the question remains, echoing across South Korea to this day. Who killed the Frog Boys, and why? Until those answers come, their story will remain one of the darkest, most heartbreaking mysteries in modern history.